In the British monarchy, money has always been an unspoken word. Too common, too coarse for the corridors of inherited grace. Yet for Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, it became a language of survival. She once waved from palace balconies, her smile part of the royal tableau. But beyond the flashbulbs, another story unfolded, of mounting bills, risky ventures, and the quiet humiliation of dependence. In a world gilded by birthright, she became a woman negotiating not privilege, but permission. To live, to earn, to remain relevant. Her fall was not born of greed, but of grasping, reaching for a kind of independence the monarchy had never taught its daughters to manage. Reports later revealed the debts, the ill-fated business partnerships, the televised contrition. Yet beneath every headline lay a simpler truth. She wanted to stand on her own, in a system built to keep her standing beside someone else. The irony was almost Shakespearean. A duchess seeking autonomy became a case study in vulnerability. Her wealth was borrowed, her reputation leased, her mistakes public property. And still, she smiled. Still, she tried to turn scandal into survival, dependency into dignity. In that contradiction, of royal birth and private struggle, lies the essence of Sarah Ferguson's story. A woman too human for the institution that crowned her, too visible for the privacy she needed, and too determined to disappear. As the camera drifts over unopened royal letters beside unpaid bills, the question lingers: what does independence cost when your name belongs to history? Exile from royal life rarely ends in reinvention. Yet Sarah Ferguson refused to vanish quietly. When the palace doors closed behind her, she turned toward the only stage still open, the public one. It was the 1990s, and Britain was learning to watch its royals differently. The mystique of monarchy was thinning. Reality television and daytime talk shows were rewriting the rules of visibility. Into that shifting world stepped Fergie, a duchess without a court, but not without a voice. She began with stories, soft, harmless ones. Children's books filled with kindness and courage, perhaps echoes of lessons she longed to teach herself. Then came wellness ventures, charity partnerships, and interviews that blurred confession with performance. She spoke about resilience, forgiveness, the art of carrying on. Each word sounded like both advice and apology. But the cameras were unforgiving. Every gesture of independence was filtered through suspicion. Was she working or selling, healing or hustling? To earn her own living was to break an unspoken rule, that royalty should never appear to need anything. And so, as she sought self-reliance, she became a mirror for Britain's evolving idea of what a woman and a duchess was allowed to be. The tabloids called it opportunism. Her defenders called it courage. Both were partly right. Fergie's ventures were uneven, sometimes earnest, sometimes misguided. A Weight Watchers ambassador here, a television guest there. Each new project a bit to rewrite her place in a story that had already judged her. Through it all, the laughter of her daughters seemed her anchor. In interviews, she spoke of family, forgiveness, and finding purpose beyond position. Yet the irony was painful. Every effort to prove she could survive on her own kept her under the very spotlight she claimed to outgrow. Behind the smiles and rehearsed resilience lay the quiet mathematics of endurance, the balancing of dignity against debt, visibility against vilification. Her life became a study in delicate negotiation, how to remain human while being perpetually public. On an old television screen, the footage flickers. Fergie reading to children, Fergie promoting a new book, Fergie smiling through 1,000 retakes. Beneath the hum of the studio lights, one can almost hear the steady ticking of a clock. A reminder that the performance of survival is itself a kind of work. In rebuilding her image, Sarah Ferguson did not find redemption. She found relevance, and for a woman once erased by scandal, that perhaps was enough. Behind every glossy interview and charitable smile, there lingered a quieter arithmetic, one the cameras never caught. By the early 2000s, Sarah Ferguson's finances had begun to fray. What started as manageable obligations became a tangle of unpaid invoices, business missteps, and promises she could no longer afford to keep. There were dinners once filled with friends, advisors, and benefactors, people who loved proximity to a duchess until the checks began to bounce. One by one, they withdrew, leaving her surrounded by silence more costly than any overdraft. Debt for Fergie was never merely numerical. It was emotional, moral, even existential, the price of belonging to a world that had dismissed her but would not release her. She was no longer a working royal, yet she could not live as an ordinary woman. The titles followed her name, but not the financial security they implied. It was Prince Andrew who remained. Steadfast, familiar and complicated. Their bond defied protocol, outlasting their marriage and baffling observers. They lived together, travelled together and in many ways rescued each other from solitude. But that closeness came at a cost. It blurred the line between affection and obligation. He became her refuge and at times her financier. Then came the emails, private words never meant for daylight. In them, Fergie appeared willing to offer access to her former husband in exchange for money. The story was too irresistible for the press to resist. The Duchess caught in a sting, the royal link for sale. Within hours, headlines wrote her downfall in bold. But behind the public disgrace lay a smaller, lonelier truth. That desperation can drive even the once privileged toward moral compromise. Her actions were indefensible, yet painfully human. A woman cornered by expectation, loyalty, and the relentless arithmetic of survival. For years, she had walked a narrow bridge between two worlds, one demanding discretion, the other demanding payment. The monarchy had rules for how to marry in and ceremonies for how to bow out, but it had no instruction for those left in its shadow, carrying the name but none of the means. To survive, she had to sell books, endorsements, appearances, even fragments of herself. Every venture became both lifeline and liability. The more she worked, the more she was judged for working. The more she earned, the less she was trusted for earning. There is a photograph that captures the paradox, a checkbook on a mahogany desk. Beside it, a letter embossed with the royal crest. The pen lies uncapped, as if abandoned mid-decision. That image tells the whole story. A woman trapped between the elegance she was born to display and the bills she could no longer pay. Her tragedy was not greed, but the unbearable cost of keeping up appearances in a life where even grace came with a price tag. And for Sarah Ferguson, that cost would never quite be settled. It was a single conversation, filmed in secret, replayed endlessly, that would undo years of fragile recovery. In May 2010, Sarah Ferguson walked into a London hotel believing she was meeting a potential investor. In truth, she was walking into a trap. Across the table sat an undercover reporter posing as a businessman. Hidden cameras recorded every word as she appeared to offer access to Prince Andrew in exchange for money. £500,000, she said. Words that, once broadcast, would echo louder than any defence she could muster. By the following morning, her name was everywhere. Television anchors spoke her downfall with practiced solemnity. Newspapers resurrected old scandals to fill new columns. For the British press, it was a familiar ritual, the Duchess fallen again. That evening, her statement arrived. The voice that had once carried children's stories and charity appeals now shook under the weight of public disgrace. "I am deeply regretful," she said. "My desperation was my downfall." Few statements have ever sounded so painfully sincere. The monarchy's response was silence. Eloquent, deliberate, final. No letters of defence, no public compassion. Within the palace, distance was its own kind of discipline. She had acted alone, they implied, and would answer alone. For the institution, her name became a cautionary footnote, a warning of what happens when one forgets the delicate choreography of royal discretion. For Fergie, it was a collapse both personal and symbolic. Behind the scandal, those close to her described something the headlines missed: fatigue. Years of financial strain, emotional dependency, and endless scrutiny had worn her thin. The boundaries between need and misjudgment blurred until she could no longer tell one from the other. Her offer that day was not the act of a schemer, but of someone cornered by circumstance, a woman who mistook survival for opportunity. She had run out of quiet solutions, and in that desperation reached for the wrong kind of help. Outside the hotel, flashbulbs exploded like gunfire. The footage shows her car door closing slowly, her head bowed, reporters shouting her name into the dark. It is an image less of guilt than of exhaustion, a portrait of someone finally overtaken by the weight of her own contradictions. In the aftermath, the world debated integrity, ethics, and shame. But beneath those headlines was something simpler and infinitely more human, a reminder that privilege does not protect against despair, and that sometimes collapse is not a single mistake, but the final echo of many small ones. When the cameras finally turned away, Sarah Ferguson did not disappear. She withdrew, not in defeat, but into something gentler, a quieter kind of existence, somewhere between forgiveness and forgetfulness. The scandal had cost her almost everything: reputation, opportunity, trust. Yet somehow it also revealed what endured: Her daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, never wavered. They stood beside her through the noise, their affection a steady defiance of public opinion. In their eyes, she was not a fallen duchess, but a mother who had survived more storms than most could name. Her bond with Prince Andrew, too, confounded expectation. While others recoiled from his controversies, she remained. They lived under the same roof at Royal Lodge, a strange, tender arrangement the tabloids could never quite define. Was it friendship, habit, or unfinished love? Perhaps all three. For Fergie, loyalty had always been both her crown and her cross. The world mocked her for standing by him, yet she rarely defended herself. Her silence was not ignorance, but endurance, the kind that refuses to explain what cannot be understood from the outside. Publicly, she found refuge in smaller gestures. Children's books, charity work, quiet appearances for causes that seldom made front pages. Her voice softened, her presence dimmed. Where she had once sought applause, she now seemed content with purpose. The monarchy never formally restored her place, but time, that subtler court, allowed her to reappear without spectacle. She attended weddings, funerals, and family gatherings as if by quiet permission. In photographs, she stood just far enough from the centre to remind the world of her distance and her resilience. She had become, in her own way, the embodiment of royal contradiction. Loyal without title, visible without power, humbled without surrender. Her rehabilitation did not arrive through headlines or interviews, but through years of showing up. For her children, for Andrew, for herself. If grace was once her stage costume, endurance became her truer attire. The laughter that once filled press conferences now sounded softer, tinged with gratitude rather than bravado. And as Windsor's gardens turned to autumn, one could imagine her walking the gravel paths alone, head unbowed, pace unhurried. A woman who had learned that survival is its own kind of dignity. For Sarah Ferguson, redemption never came as a headline. It came as a life quietly continued. History will not remember Sarah Ferguson for splendour or ceremony, but for endurance, the quiet, complicated kind that refuses to fade. She lived between two currencies the monarchy understands all too well: affection and approval. When one was withdrawn, she tried, with every resource left to her, to earn the other. Her story is not a lesson in greed, but in gratitude stretched beyond sense. She believed goodwill could be rebuilt, that apology could be a kind of labour, that charm might yet pay the bills when titles could not. It was an innocent miscalculation to imagine that warmth might outlast judgment. The monarchy has always prized loyalty, but only when it costs nothing. Fergie's loyalty, to Andrew, to family, to the image of belonging, became her undoing precisely because it was costly. She stayed close when distance would have been easier, spoke kindly when silence would have been safer. For that, she was punished in headlines far louder than her voice. And yet, in her persistence, there remains a trace of something quietly noble. She did not rewrite her past or plead for pity. She simply continued, through debt, through scandal, through the slow work of being tolerated again. Redemption, if it came at all, came not through forgiveness, but through fatigue. The world grew tired of judging her, and she grew tired of defending herself. Now her legacy rests in a strange, reflective light, neither villain nor victim, but something in between. A reminder that the British monarchy, for all its ceremony, is still a story of people who make human mistakes beneath impossible expectations. A candle burns low beside a royal crest, its flame small but unwavering. In that flicker lies her truth. Loyalty does not always lead to glory, and survival in the royal imagination is often the most radical act of all.